Hey, if you have IBD and you're consuming the wrong type of fiber, you can be really making it hard on yourself to get out of flare-ups and properly into remission. So in today's video, we want to figure out what are the right type of fibers to consume for inflammatory bowel disease and what are some not so safe fibers. Because the type of fiber that you consume, if you have inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's or ulcerative colitis, is drastically important. Some fibers are going to actually decrease inflammation and set you up for success and improve your microbiome long term, while other fibers literally aren't going to have any other benefit or any benefit at all, and they're just going to flare you up or contribute to symptoms. So we need to figure out what fibers should we be focusing on and which ones might we want to avoid, at least in the beginning, and maybe save them till later when we're in a really good place. Now, my name's Dr. Sean Golden. I run Golden Health Method, which is a site dedicated to giving you natural research-based strategies to help you gain freedom from chronic health conditions. And in this video, we want to discuss again the right type of fibers for inflammatory bowel disease. This isn't going to be an extensive video because I want to keep it short, but I do want to give you some practical take-home tips that you can implement starting today that can help you in your IBD journey. So what we want to know is that there are safe fibers and cautious fibers. The safe fibers are fibers that in general, those with IBD do very well with. And even if you're in a bad place, these safe fibers you can usually consume at least a little bit of, which is a really cool thing because that can support your microbiome even if you're in a bad place. Whereas with the cautious fibers, these fibers, they may have a tiny bit of benefit when it comes to gut health, maybe over a very long time frame, but more often than not, especially if you already have symptoms for IBD, they're just going to contribute to more symptoms and contribute to maybe flaring you up even more. So we really want to get a good distinction and separation between what we should be focusing on and what we should be avoiding. Now, I'll give you two really, really good options when it comes to safe fibers. Safe fibers in general, this isn't 100% hard rule, but almost in general, they are fermentable and soluble. Now, what does that mean? Fermentable means that when you consume the fiber, it can act as food for your microbiome. That's really what it means. That means the fiber can get fermented by your bacteria in your colon. And a lot of times that's a very good thing because it can feed the microbiome. It can allow you to have a diverse microbiome. And a diverse microbiome prevents any one particular species, potentially pathogenic or negative species, from overgrowing and taking over and causing problems. So we want a diverse array of good bacteria in our gut, and fermentable fibers are the type that help us do that. Now, many and most fermentable fibers are also soluble. The old definition for fibers used to be soluble and insoluble, and there are limitations with trying to break it up in those categories. I like to think of fibers more in terms of fermentable and non-fermentable, because that is really what matters most when it comes to the microbiome health. Now, two great options for increasing this good fiber, this fermentable fiber, are steel-cut oats and Xylem husk. Now, both of these, this food and this fiber source, they tend to go very well with IBD sufferers. So if you have IBD or you've been struggling, even if you've been in a bad place, these two foods, even though they're packed with fiber, they tend to respond very, very well to the gut of someone with IBD. And mainly because they have very, very good types of fiber in there that actually feed the gut, but also at the same time are not very difficult to digest and are not hard on the gut, which is what we're going to talk about pretty soon. So why do I say steel-cut oats? Well, rolled oats or regular oats will work just fine. However, from my personal experience and just the theory of it, Steel cut oats are a little bit more of an unrefined food. So that you're really going to get, as far as all of the benefits that oats could deliver, you're going to get the maximum amount of benefit when it comes to steel cut oats. When you cook oats, make sure if you cook it over a stovetop, something like that, with steel cut oats, make sure you cook them very well. They should be very, very soft when you eat them, and that softness is actually important to have it digest properly. For the general public, that doesn't matter too much, but for someone with IBD, the softness or the texture of the food really does matter a lot in terms of how the gut responds to that particular food. So cook it very soft, and usually that will do very well for you. Now, before moving on to Xylem Husk, I just want to give you an example of how you can incorporate steel cut oats. A lot of times, when we feel very restricted in what we can eat, when we feel like we have to cut out a lot of different foods because they're flaring us up or contributing to symptoms, then we start relying on very safe foods. I'll give you an example of one of those foods. White rice is something that a lot of people with IBD can sometimes just start focusing on or consuming because they do fine with it. It's not a problematic food, and so they can start relying on it. However, relying on something like white rice can actually contribute to symptom progression and contribute to what's called the vicious cycle, where you get a little bit out of the flare up, a little into remission, but then you go back into it, and it just goes in this circular pattern, and you never seem to break free and stay in long-term remission. And one of those reasons why is because if you're focusing on eating something like white rice or other very safe foods, white rice is a pure carb. It doesn't have any polyphenols. It doesn't have any fiber. It doesn't have any phytonutrients. And so it isn't contributing to your gut health in any way. It's a very short-term thinking strategy because you're not benefiting your microbiome by eating white rice long-term. However, let's say that you find you do completely fine with steel cut oats. Let's say you do just as well with steel cut oats as you do with white rice. Choosing steel cut oats to eat or to rely on instead of white rice is such a better long-term thinking strategy because it is loaded with polyphenols which help positively modulate your gut microbiome. And it's loaded with this positive fiber that's going to feed your microbiome. And so over time, you're going to be contributing to a better gut bacteria, healthier microbiome, and you're going to be helping yourself get out of this vicious cycle. Choosing something like steel cut oats is long-term, very smart thinking, whereas relying on something like white rice is a short-term strategy that isn't necessarily productive for long-term. So I just want to make that point clear because it's something that's not talked about very often with IBD. We don't want to look for band-aid solutions here. We don't want band-aid strategies. We want to get long-term freedom. And by choosing the right fiber, that's one way that will help you do that. Now, Xylem Husk is usually taken in the form of a supplement. There are certain brand names that give flavoring to Xylem Husk, but that uses a lot of different artificial chemicals, and I usually just rely on regular Xylem Husk. Usually I choose whole Xylem Husk, personally, but there's also ground Xylem Husk. If you do get whole Xylem Husk, you can grind it yourself in a coffee grinder so that you don't have to buy both options. When you use Xylem Husk in different recipes or cooking or anything like that, some recipes call for whole and some call for ground or powdered, and they give different textures. So I just want to make that point clear before you go out and buy the wrong kind. Xylem Husk has a growing amount of research for, almost over 2 decades now, for both IBD and IBS, and it's generally a very safe fiber that people respond to very well. Now, when it comes to implementing these fibers, make sure you implement them slowly. You don't want to go from consuming hardly any fiber a day to like 50 grams of fiber in a day. I mean, your gut's not going to respond well to that. It's just too quick. So you want to make sure you're increasing slowly and incrementally week to week, adding, 5 grams, 10 grams, 15 grams, until you get to maybe 30, 40 grams, something like that. Now, if you don't know exactly when to consume fiber, That was in a previous video I talked about, and I'll link it in the description below. Make sure you check out that video if you haven't seen it, because not only the types of fiber are important, but when to consume fiber is very important. So you want to make sure that you're eating fiber at the right time to support your overall remission strategy or helping you get into a good place. Okay, now cautious fibers, we'll go over this really quickly. Cautious fibers are essentially non-fermentable and usually insoluble. And the best way to think about cautious fibers would be to think of like a raw stalk of broccoli or like a raw stalk of kale or something like that. It's very tough. That toughness comes from a particular fiber called cellulose that is completely non-fermentable and insoluble. And it doesn't have any benefits for the most part when it comes to inflammatory bowel disease. So we don't want to really focus on this one because all it can really do is contribute to problems for the most part. So you want to avoid hard vegetables such as broccoli and other stem-like vegetables, like I just described. If you do want to, let's say if you're in a really good place and you want to try to start incorporating some broccoli back in, for example, just make sure you cook it as soft as possible. You definitely don't want to consume it raw. But in general, these guys are not going to be the type that you want to focus on, especially if you are in a flare-up or if you're struggling and having a hard time right now. Similarly, whole nuts and seeds contain quite a bit of insoluble fiber as well. To give you an example, raw almonds are almost completely insoluble when it comes to the type of fiber that they are in them. Now, that doesn't mean to always avoid almonds, because almonds can actually be great food for the microbiome because of all of the other components. It's loaded with polyphenols. It does have some fermentable fiber in it, and it usually is very good for overall gut health for a healthy person. But for someone with IBD, whole raw nuts can be problematic and can contribute to flare-ups and symptoms. So it's not something we want to focus on, especially if you're not in a good place yet. Now again, as far as the timing of when to start incorporating these guys back in, make sure you look at my other video where I talk about the timing for fiber intake. But in this video, I wanted to make these points very clear that there are certain fibers to focus on and there are fibers that you don't want to focus on. Of course, in my master course, Ultimate Freedom from Crohn's and Colitis, I go over the fibers in much more detail and give you every single option available, but I just wanted to give you some practical take-home tips right now. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you soon. And make sure that you after watching this video, you go out there and you do what you need to do to be able to gain freedom again so that you can start living fully. So again, hope you enjoyed this, hope this serves you, and I'll see you again in the next video. Hey, Dr. Sean here again. I just want to jump in at the end of this video to let you know that I created a free mini course for those of you who have inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's, and ulcerative colitis. It's called IBD Get Your Fats Right, and what it is it's really a comprehensive mini course trying to make it as simple as possible on the importance of choosing certain fats to consume on a daily basis compared to others, because most people don't understand or underestimate the role that the types of fats that you consume and possibly the quantity of fats that you consume can play a major role in symptom progression and the ability to possibly get into remission if you're suffering with inflammatory bowel disease. This is something that's critically important. It's why I created a free mini course around it. Trust me, it goes way farther than just eat good fats and avoid bad fats. You're really gonna love it. It's really gonna help you understand what you need to do in order to gain freedom potentially from your chronic health condition. So I urge you to just check it out. It's completely free. There is going to be a link in the description below, so just go there and check it out. I hope it serves you, and I'm excited to see you again. Take care.